Hey, if you're looking to learn how to read the Bible effectively and develop Bible study skills, you've come to the right place. Welcome to another Bible study walkthrough. We're in Proverbs chapter 3 if you've been tracking along with us. If you have not, watch the previous videos or just jump in today. Proverbs chapter 3, I'm going to do my best to stop and pause and explain what I'm highlighting, why I'm doing it, and hopefully help you learn how to begin looking for the right things when you read the Bible. I want to help you develop your skills. So Proverbs chapter 3, starting in verse 1. It says, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but," and this is something I'm going to circle off the bat, transitional word lets me know something's about to change. "Let your heart keep my commandments." So instead of forgetting the teaching, and I want to note here that the teaching, I'm going to square up in green, and I'm going to square up the commandments, because these are two ways of saying the same thing, teaching and commandments, right? The commandments instruct and give command for what the truth is, and it comes in the form of teaching. And Solomon is saying, my son, don't forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. Now, I want to do something real quick. Something that I'm already wanting to highlight is the active words that are assigned to the son. In other words, these are verbs that the son is going to do. Do not forget. So that's a negative. Do not forget. But instead, let your heart keep. So there's the letting and there's the keeping my commandments. Okay? So the son here, and I know we're maybe breaking this down a little too much for some of you. You don't want to get lost in the weeds. I get that, but this is more of a really deep dive into Bible study. We're not doing a broad overview and going through Proverbs all at once. I want to stop and pause and help you learn to recognize what to look for. So I notice a couple things the son is doing. The son is called to not forget the teaching of the father. That's his decision. That's his command from the father. But instead, let your heart keep my commandments. So you can either forget or you can keep. Those are your two options here when it comes to what the son can do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's not forget, let's instead keep the commandments. Why? I'm going to circle this as well, because this for lets me know almost because. It's like here, do this because, or for, here's why, length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. So notice the three things that he lists. Long days on the earth, long life, another way of saying that, and peace. Those are the three things that he says will result or be added to you when you choose to, listen to wisdom and the teaching of the Father, when you keep the commandments, right? The wisdom that God is giving through Solomon. When you follow the commandments of God and you live the way God calls you to, length of days, years of life, and peace, as God decides is best, he will add to you. So notice the son is not doing the adding. This is actually what wisdom, or God with the wisdom, is doing. Okay? So he'll go on to say, let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Okay? There's another thing that the son is called to do. Hey, don't let the steadfast love and the faithfulness forsake you. What does that mean? Well, I think it's another way of saying, keep my commandments, because it'll be better for your life. Peace will be added to you. And another way of saying it is the steadfast love and faithfulness of God, primarily in mind here, may be revealed through wisdom. That right there is what Solomon is saying. Don't let that forsake you, right? He'll go on to verse 2. Okay, and this is what he says. He says, bind them around your neck. So guess what? Here's something the son is doing. Again, he's binding the commandments or the teachings of Solomon around his neck. In other words, it becomes a kind of ornament, something that decorates his life as he lives out the wisdom and teaching of his father, right? People see and recognize the beauty of that wisdom come to life. It becomes what a decoration or an ornament is, something that's added to the body, right? So write them on the tablet of your heart. So again, we have things that the son is doing. And it's helpful to note when you see, the same thing being communicated in different ways like this, it's helpful to note it because it's going to process differently when you see it in these various forms. So for instance, when you see, hey, write the commandments on the tablet of your heart, that is going to ring differently in your mind and your heart and in your understanding than bind them around your neck. That's why biblical authors will use different ways of saying the same thing, because it's going to resonate with you in different ways, okay? So what are we binding? We're binding the commandments, the teachings. What are we writing on the tablet of our hearts? The commandments and the teachings, okay? So he already mentioned not to let steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you, but notice the two things involved here, right? They're being bound around the neck and they're being written on the heart, okay? Or the tablet, okay? Now the tablet here makes me think of, well, the tablet of stone that the 10 Commandments were written on, right? When Moses comes down the mountain, has those 10 Commandments, they were written on tablets of stone. So the heart here becomes another kind of tablet that wisdom should be written on, the tablet of our heart, right? And so when the Son does this, when we bind wisdom around our neck, when we write wisdom on our own heart, how? By keeping wisdom, by keeping the commandments of God, by doing what he says. Well, here's what he says will happen. Here's the result. You will find favor and good success, right? But not just in the sight of God, also in the sight of man. So in the sight of God and in the sight of man. So the wisdom literature offers you a wise way to live and tells you, the authors of the Proverbs or the wisdom literature will tell you what is most likely going to happen. When you apply wisdom, you're going to, experience a kind of life most, not most definitely, but it's more likely that you'll experience this kind of life, one of favor, one of good success in the sight of God and man, okay? You're just making way for that to happen more likely when you apply wisdom. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. So notice, this is a callback to the heart. I want to circle this because what I do when I notice a repeating word is I circle it. I square it up. I highlight it, whatever it ends up being. And what I want to do is I want to connect it all the way back to, within a few verses. How often is that word repeated? I want to connect that. Well, first we saw the commandments being written on the heart of the person who receives wisdom. Now we see that same heart trusting in the Lord. In other words, it seems to be that trusting God looks like doing what he says. Valuing what he says and what he commands, valuing his ways and his laws, not just enough to retain them, but enough to apply them and actually enjoy them, okay? So here, he's called to trust. We're called to trust in who? In the Lord. With what? With all your heart. Now, this is something that I want to circle because it's not just the heart generally. It's actually the entirety of your being. Everything that composes your heart, employ that in such a way where you're trusting God with it. Let there be no reservation in your heart for not trusting him, for doubting him. Let there be complete trust. Now that's hard, but the more you grow in wisdom, the more your heart begins to trust in the Lord, the more you apply his wisdom. So I want you to see here, writing the commandments on the tablet of the heart is another way of saying trusting in who? In the Lord. Why? Because those commandments you're keeping come from him. Okay? So this is how I read the Bible, is I try and make sense of all the ideas and how they connect, at least in the wisdom literature here. This is going to be different, maybe than how we would read narrative or the epistles, right? Or the gospels. Trusting in God with all our heart. And, I want to note the and here, okay? Do not lean on your own understanding. I gotta highlight that. So now the Son is told, hey, trust in God. And he goes, okay, let me trust God alongside myself. No, hold on. Trust in God and don't lean on your own understanding at all. When it conflicts and contradicts what God says in his word, you trust in what God has said and what he says is best rather than what your own understanding says is best, right? Leaning on the understanding here is to not trust in God, right? Because he says, and do not lean, which means these two ideas are connected. Whenever you see the word and, I know this is like grammar 101, but some of you have never actually applied these grammatical, rules and skills to the scriptures, and it actually changes things, right? Trusting in God here and not leaning on the understanding is essentially the same thing. When I choose not to lean on my understanding, well, whose understanding am I leaning on? His. Even when my own heart and feelings and emotions and my own thinking faculties say otherwise and say something different, I'm going to revert to what he says. I'm going to lean on and trust in what God says and who he is, rather than thinking, you know what, my understanding of the world is correct. The word understanding is used quite a bit in Proverbs. The author is giving you understanding in the form of wisdom, right? But you can't have wisdom and receive it if you think your understanding is perfect and not lacking. You need to actually realize, you know what, my own understanding isn't worth leaning on entirely. Notice the word lean here. I just want to circle that because it's another way of saying trust, right? Because you go, what does it mean to trust in the Lord? Well, think about leaning on something. Okay, I can imagine that. Think about leaning on your own understanding as if it's perfect and infallible. Okay, I can picture that. Now, instead of leaning on your understanding as if it's perfect, lean on him. Well, how do I do that? You do what he says. You receive his wisdom as perfect and ultimate, even when your own understanding and perception of the world says something different, right? You trust in his ways above your own because they're higher. So, in all your ways, acknowledge him, okay? So another way of saying, hey, trust in the Lord is, hey, in all your ways, just acknowledge him. And he will. So here's the result. Remember up here, we highlighted in yellow the result. When you write wisdom on your heart, you will find favor and good success. And you know what? I just saw something. I got to go for it. The favor here and the success are essentially the same idea. Success without God's favor is only going to last so long, and it really won't amount to anything. Any worldly success you qualify without God's favor on it is not real success in God's eyes. But the kind of favor in the sight of God, when he gives favor and the success, if he gives you favor, right, and on your success, then that's something that's sustainable. That's something worth going after, right? So this is not just favor in a general sense where God does nice things for me. This is the success I find he's graced to happen. He's approved it. He said, that's what I want for you. So that favor and success is the result. Same with God making your paths straight. When you acknowledge God in your ways instead of leaning on your own understanding as ultimate, right? He promises he will make straight your paths. He'll make clear what you're supposed to do. He'll bring clarity to your decisions, right? He'll light up the darkness. He'll light up the next step. He'll tell you where to go and how to conduct yourself when you're there and on the way there. He'll make straight your paths. Guess what? Because these two things right here are the results, right? Finding favor and success, having my paths made straight. I just want to think about that for a minute. Could these two ideas be connected? Now think with me. This is why we ask questions. We go, okay, finding favor and success in the sight of God and man, that's the result of writing God's commands on the tablet of our hearts. In other words, keeping his commands and obeying it. That's number one. Number two, he will make straight your paths when you acknowledge him and trust in the Lord, which means I'm writing them on the tablet of my heart. I'm doing what he says. So essentially, he's saying, when you do what God says, write them on the tablet of your heart. When you do what God says, trust in the Lord. These two things will be the result of your life. Right there. The favor and success comes in the form of knowing how to live and knowing where to go in any given decision. He makes straight your paths. He lights up the next step. That's the favor and that's the success that God says he will give to those who actually take his commands seriously, enough to receive them, love them, value them, and write them on the tablet of their heart, okay? So God makes your path straight, not you, because my understanding is not perfect, right? So trusting in God here is trusting him to direct my life, rather than my limited understanding. So you have two options here. Will you trust in the Lord, or will you trust in yourself and your own, fallible heart, right? Well, I'm going to trust in him because he's perfect. He never changes, and he's faithful and reliable. my understanding is not perfect. I don't have the full scope of knowledge and understanding of the world. He does. I change. He does not. I'm not faithful and reliable as much as he is. So when I lean on him, what I'm doing is I'm trusting him to direct and make straight my paths, right? And I'm also trusting him enough to do what he's already told me is a straight path, which is found in the commandments, all right? So I really hope this is clarifying. Maybe it was confusing for some of you. I really hope that as these go on, as we do more of these, I'll get better. Doing my best here. I hope that you are starting to see what it is that we should be looking for when you really, really study and meditate on the scriptures. There are certain things. Sometimes you pay attention to the conditions. Sometimes you pay attention to the verbs. Sometimes you pay attention to the results. Sometimes all those things come together. So I hope this was a blessing to you. You guys have a wonderful day, and I'll see you guys in the next Bible study walkthrough.